Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and you're all very welcome to the IrBea BioEnergy Webinar Series 2020. This morning we present to you webinar number 10. Our topic this morning is Digestate from biogas as a biofertilizer. So just by way of introduction, I'd like to briefly introduce the Irish BioEnergy Association to you, as we have a number of attendees this morning who have not joined us on previous webinars. So our objective as an organisation is to work towards a sustainable energy future with bioenergy. We are the voice of the Irish bioenergy industry, working on behalf of members spread across the main bioenergy sectors of biomass, biogas, biofuels, biochar, wood fuels and energy crops. We're open to new members, and we'll be glad to speak to you about that if you are interested in becoming a member, and you can find out more information at irbea.org. Our organisation has a wide and diverse programme of activities and events right through the year. We offer opportunities for networking. We complete lobbying work on behalf of our members. We support our members in various technical areas. We also involve in a number of research and development projects in the area of small-scale biogas, biochar, and we're working with SEI to develop a register of biomass designers and installers, and also roll out the wood fuel quality assurance scheme. As I said, our objective is to build an Irish biogas and bioenergy industry, which would include biogas and biomass in all the various sectors. And you can find out more details on our website and also on our social media channels. This morning's agenda, I will open with a brief introduction. I am the CEO of the Irish BioEnergy Association. My contact information is available there on the screen, shown fine at irbea.org, for anyone that would like to get in touch. And this morning we're delighted to be joined by Stephen Nolan from Green Generation and Glassport Bio. And following Stephen's presentation, we will have a panel discussion, including Noel Gavigan, who is our technical executive. You, the attendees this morning, can submit questions through the tab which is at the bottom of your screen, and we will endeavour to answer as many of your questions as possible. The recording and the slides from this webinar will be available afterwards on our website. Just a brief word about our bioenergy series, webinar series. It is running successfully. We're getting large attendances, which is great to see, and thank you all for joining. And we have many return attendees every week. We're running fortnightly on Wednesdays from 9:30 to 10:30. And just a reminder, as this webinar is focused again on the biogas area, as has our previous two webinars, number 8 and number 9, both are available on our website if you would like to go back and look at the presentations and the previous recordings. Webinar number 8 focused on the policy and actions needed to mobilise the biogas industry in Ireland, whereas webinar 9 focused on the potential for more smaller scale anaerobic digestion on Irish farms. We're currently planning our series for the rest of the year with a number of dates between here and the end of the year, and we're also making plans to begin populating our agenda for the 2021 series. If any members or stakeholders who are logged in today would like to present, please contact us and we will see and try and facilitate you as best we can. You can contact myself or my colleague Teresa O'Brien, who does invaluable work every week behind the scenes to make sure that the webinars run off successfully. So the next webinar, number 11, will take place in 2 weeks' time at the same time. And on that webinar, we will have representatives from the European Biogas Association to give us the European context in terms of the biogas industry. And full details will be published on our social media and communications channels closer to the time. We thank you for joining this morning, and we hope you can join our next webinar. By way of introduction, and just to summarize our previous 2 webinars, I'd like to just briefly again let you know that the recordings and presentations are available on our website, and we spoke very distinctly about the two scales of anaerobic digestion which are possible in Ireland, and I'd like to just briefly summarize from the previous 2 webinars and make a very, very clear distinction between small-scale anaerobic digestion and more a medium large-scale model. So the location of small-scale anaerobic digesters would be on farm, and we would see them complementing existing farming enterprises, and we're focused on small scale through our European Innovation Partnership project, which is currently ongoing. Whereas at a medium to large scale, we would see that these plants being developed in a cooperative style, centrally located within a catchment area where feedstock would be available. The farmer's role is distinctly different in our view in the two scales. At a small scale, we believe the farmer's role is to supply the feedstock and operate the plant, whereas at a medium to large scale, we believe that it's the farmer's role to provide feedstock to the plant operated by a cooperative or private enterprise. The feedstock supply would be available on the farm with no import requirement on the small scale, whereas the medium to large scale, you would have the material sourced from many farmers and suppliers within the catchment area. Regarding energy demand, we see that small-scale anaerobic digestion would satisfy on-farm energy demand or in the vicinity, and that with medium to large scale, the output would be transmitted to a network, and that network could be the electricity grid or indeed the gas grid. And we feel that the supports required are completely different for both scales. At the small scale, we feel that capital support is required as the gas that's produced, the biogas that's produced, is offsetting an existing fossil fuel use, whereas at a medium to large scale, a biogas support scheme is required in the form of a support or a feed-in tariff to bridge the gap between the cost of production of biogas and the current price of fossil gas available from the gas grid. This morning's topic is Digestate and Digestate from biogas as a biofertilizer. And Digestate is common no matter what the scale is produced from the process or the material left at the end of the process after you have your biogas harnessed and taken away. The Digestate material is a common across all scales of anaerobic digestion. So this morning's discussion, we're going to find out more about the Digestate produced from the process and how it is a valuable fertilizer with an abundance of plant available nutrients. And I'm delighted to welcome Stephen Nolan of Green Generation and Glassport Bio, who will present this morning to you. Stephen has done a significant amount of work in this area from a research perspective through Teagasc and NUI Galway. And we're delighted that Stephen could take the time out this morning to present to us. And so, Stephen, it's over to you if I unshare my screen and you can share your slides. So.
Hello.
Not sharing it now, Stephen. There it is. And if you go to presentation mode, it'll be great.
So, hello, thanks, Sean, for the introduction, and IrBea for inviting me to talk this morning. My name is Stephen Nolan. I'm the manager of Green Generation, and I do some work with Glassport Bio as well, which is a Galway-based research company. And I'm just finishing up my PhD with NUIG. Today I'm going to talk about a lot of my PhD work and the potential for using Digestate in Ireland. So in Ireland we have a lot of cattle and pigs, 6.45 million cattle and 1.6 million pigs, producing a significant amount of slurry each day. It totals about 34 million tons per annum. Typically that slurry is stored over winter at least, and it releases greenhouse gas, CH4, nitrous oxide, ammonia, and it's a potential reservoir for pathogens as well. That slurry is then land spread, and during land spreading, there's release of pathogens and CH4 to the atmosphere, and potential for pathogens and nutrients to run off to groundwater and for contamination of soil and things like that. There are some steps that can be taken to reduce the impact of slurry on the environment. You can cover the storage, which helps to reduce emissions and ammonia loss. And you can use low emission spreading technology, which will reduce release of pathogens to the environment and reduce emissions to the air, ammonia emissions especially, but you still have greenhouse gases, methane being released to the air, and there's still a risk of pathogens and nutrient runoff to the water. So the Department of Ag wanted to carry out research that determined the risk of pathogen runoff from slurry compared with Digestate, and so they funded this project with NUIG. And in that context, I'll talk today about some environmental targets that have become even more prominent with the European Green Deal being released, particularly farm to fork, which aims to reduce chemical fertilizer use, and this zero pollution target, which aims to reduce greenhouse gas and ammonia emissions to the air and reduce runoff to the water. My work with Green Generation, I've come on board as the manager in the last couple of months. We're currently working with the Department of Ag to revalidate our pasteurizers, and that's progressing well. I'll talk a little bit more about Green Generation in a minute. And then Glassport Bio is a Galway-based research company that have an additive for slurry or digestate that will stop greenhouse gas emissions during storage. So that's some interesting work that's going on there too. Anaerobic digestion is a good solution for reducing the environmental impact of slurry for a number of reasons. You reduce emissions because you're capturing the carbon and you're converting it to electricity. You improve the fertilizer value because the ammonia becomes more concentrated and becomes more bioavailable during digestion. It provides an additional income stream to the rural economy. And below, on the bottom of the screen, that's Green Generation's site in Nerney, County Kildare, and across the road from that is a farm of wheat, and they're using predominantly Digestate to grow their crops. So in doing so, they've reduced their chemical fertilizer bill by more than 2/3. We know the benefits of anaerobic digestion. They seem fairly obvious, but the question the Department of Ag had in particular for the research was, can anaerobic digestion reduce the pathogen load to the that's the question that my research focused on. So to do that, we wanted to determine the impact of different feedstock mixes, pre and post anaerobic digestion pasteurization, and different process configurations on the survival of target pathogens. Ideally, we wanted to optimize anaerobic digestion for pathogen reduction or sanitization. And to do that, we carried out controlled field trials in Johnstone Castle in County Wexford with Jagus. My setup in the lab in UIG mimicked Irish farm-based AD. We used fat oils and grease and mixed with slurry and at a mesophilic temperature. So just for anyone that mightn't understand anaerobic digestion, it's a 4-stage process whereby organic material is broken down into biogas, which can be used to generate electricity or upgraded to produce biomethane that can be injected into the gas grid. The byproduct of that is digestate, which is the focus of this study here. There are some limitations to adoption of anaerobic digestion in Ireland, which include competition for potential feedstocks. A lot of potential feedstocks are still being incinerated or landfilled or going to composting, where their potential for energy recovery is diminished. Finance becomes difficult in the absence of clear policy support, and then grid connection can also be complicated, as anyone in the renewable energy sector will know. So anyway, we mimicked Irish farm-based AD in the lab in triplicate bioreactors, and the first thing we saw that was immediately when you process slurry in anaerobic digestion, there's a reduction in fecal indicator bacteria, E. coli and enterococci. That reduction was significant. After seven days in the anaerobic digestion plant, the fecal indicator bacteria in slurry were reduced below the threshold required that the EU regulatory standard deems safe. So to deem digestate safe, EU requires that E. coli or enterococci are below 1,000 CFU per gram. Within a week of being in anaerobic digestion, that standard was achieved. We stored slurry for 2 months beyond the trial starting, and we found that in stored slurry, at no point within 2 months did the fecal indicator bacteria reduce below the threshold that the EU require for digestate. So we're spreading 34 million tons of slurry per annum without any real treatment, and the fecal indicator bacteria are quite high in that slurry and remain so even during storage. So anaerobic digestion initially looks like it has potential even as a slurry amendment to reduce pathogen load to the environment. We wanted to see if we could optimize anaerobic digestion for sanitization. So we noticed that we were feeding 5 days per week, Monday to Friday, and then we were feeding extra on Friday to cover until Monday again because we didn't want to be in the lab all the time. And what we noticed was that by Monday, the indicator bacteria had reduced significantly. So they're seen as these spikes in what was achievable. So the blue line indicates the required EU threshold, the required removal, and the green spikes are when we actually achieved that. And so we thought we could amend the feeding regime so that we would improve sanitization. There was something going on that was improving sanitization by feeding more and leaving it in there for longer. So we changed the feeding regime to every 3 days. We kept the organic loading rate the same. And in doing so, after a perturbation period, we found that actually every single time the standard was achieved through digestion, through anaerobic digestion alone. At the same time, what was interesting is that we found improved biogas yield. So those yellow dots are the biogas yields throughout the trial. And as you can see, after the perturbation period, biogas yield came close to doubled over time. We thought that was interesting. We thought both of those things were interesting. So we carried out some analysis of the microbial community and the reactors, and we found some indication that there's some viruses that attack the pathogens and live in the pathogens. The spaceship looking things up on top there, and so by leaving it in for longer, it seems that we can create the conditions for those good viruses essentially to kill off the pathogens. What was also interesting is that we found an increase in Centrophomonas, which is a bacteria that breaks down fats. So by leaving the fats in there for longer, we were able to increase Centrophomonas over time and so produce a better biogas yield. So all that to say, there's some scope for optimization, both sanitization in places where pasteurization isn't required. There are some biogas setups that don't require pasteurization, and optimization for biogas yield. For the most part, anyone taking in waste, especially animal byproducts, are required to pasteurize. And so the department wanted to make sure that the Irish National Transformation Standard, which is 96 hours at 60 degrees Celsius, is mostly applicable to dry AD, but they wanted to make sure that that is at least satisfies the EU or is equivalent to the EU standard of 1 hour at 70 degrees Celsius. And our trials found that when you pasteurize pre-anaerobic digestion and then mix with slurry, as is sometimes the practice, the pathogens in the slurry obviously survive because you're just pasteurizing the animal, the off-site animal byproducts or the incoming animal byproducts. But if you pasteurize post-AD, you essentially, it doesn't, regardless of the standard you go for, 96 hours at 60 degrees Celsius or 1 hour at 70 degrees Celsius, you achieve satisfactory sanitization every time. So that satisfies the department's requirements to meet the EU standard, regardless of whether you're doing 96 hours at 60 degrees Celsius or 1 hour at 70 degrees Celsius. 96 hours at 60 degrees requires a significant energy input that makes it unfeasible for most AD plants. So the EU standard is the standard that most AD plants will be applying. I think I go to land spreading trial where we took some of the digestate and some of the slurry from the reactor trials, and we spread it on land in Johnson Castle in a controlled site. And we tested for fecal indicator bacteria in the runoff from rainfall simulations, and we tested the runoff quality for nutrients and metals. We tested greenhouse gas emissions and grass yields and nutrient and metal uptake, comparing dairy cattle slurry with digestate. So this is the setup in Johnson Castle. We use rainout shelters, which can be seen in the background of the first photo there, to control the rainfall and the amount of water that was going on site. And we use a rainfall simulator on site to simulate heavy rainfall, indicative of a worst case scenario where digestate slurry is spread within 24 hours of forecast rainfall. That shouldn't happen. It's not allowed to happen, but on occasion, it's the worst case scenario. It might happen. So these are the results from that trial. This is how we collected runoff in these cups. On the bottom left, you can see. And then we analyzed that runoff for fecal indicator bacteria, E. coli, and enterococci, and we analyzed it for nutrients and metals as well. The E. coli in the runoff, these are a log CFU, so each jump there is multiplied by 10. So so this is the E. coli. So on the first day, if there was rainfall immediately after land spreading, which should never happen, the E. coli were 1 log higher in slurry runoff than in pasteurized or unpasteurized digestate. And on day 2, the pasteurized and unpasteurized digestate had come in line with untreated controls, and the dairy cattle slurry was still significantly higher, more than 1 log higher. By day 30, all treatments had come in line with the untreated control, the first data point for the untreated control. The results for enterococci are more stark. Dairy cattle slurry remained high throughout. So this is the analysis of the water samples from runoff throughout a 30-day trial. Found that dairy untreated slurry was much higher in enterococci, which is a fecal indicator bacteria, than digestate, whether the digestate was pasteurized or unpasteurized. Again, nutrients in the runoff. So there's nitrogen in the runoff. Again, there's a heavy rainfall incident immediately after spreading, which should never be the case. If the rainfall event happened 1 day after land spreading, there was runoff from each of the treatments, and that reduced the risk of that reduced 2 days after spreading, and so forth. Some other nutrients we tested were phosphorus and carbon, and again, the phosphorus was similar between treatments, while the carbon was significantly higher for slurry. This makes sense because carbon has been captured in the digester in anaerobic digestion, so it would naturally be lower in digestate, the runoff from it. For metals, iron and calcium in the runoff from dairy cattle slurry was higher. There was the aluminium looks higher there, but there was just one outlier in that's skewing the numbers. The rest of them are fairly similar. All of these are below thresholds, EU thresholds for water quality standards. So for the grass yield, just in its use as a biofertilizer, to get back to that, we see throughout there isn't a massive difference in the results for slurry and digestate. There is an initial, you see the main boost comes in the first 14 to 30 days, where the digestate has a more immediate effect on grass growth. What we found is that in longer scale trials, so this was a one season trial essentially, in longer scale trials carried out over a few years, there's a compounding effect of digestate where with the nutrients in it build up, the micronutrients in the soil build up over time. Any comparative studies between chemical fertilizer and digestate have found a depletion in micronutrients and in all other nutrients except those provided in the chemical fertilizer over time, whereas digestate actually replenishes the soil and makes it healthy again. We carried out an emissions trial then, just the brown container there is testing ammonia with the photoacoustic analyzer, and the box on the top right is for testing greenhouse gas emissions over time. What we found was to be expected in terms of methane emissions. The methane emissions from slurry were off the charts higher in the first couple of days, as most of the methane has been captured during anaerobic digestion. The digestate was lower. Nitrous oxide emissions, initially the digestate had a spike after about 2 days, but then as the slurry broke down in the field, the nitrous oxide emissions over time were a lot higher for slurry. For ammonia emissions, which is often a concern with digestate, the numbers were similar between slurry and digestate. And what we found is that timing of application is the key for maximizing the fertilizer value of digestate and minimizing emissions. When local farmers to green generation target the growing crop, they see an immediate boost, and that's when the value of the digestate can be most realized, rather than spreading on late season or when the crop isn't growing. It's best to spread on the growing crop. During storage of slurry, as I've said, there's a few issues with it, particularly greenhouse gas emissions and ammonia emissions, and that essentially can be looked at as a decline in value of the slurry. It's a decline in value of its potential as a feedstock for AD, and it's a decline in value of its potential fertilizer as ammonia is being released. So in that case, the work of Gossport comes into play, where we have an amendment that can essentially stop greenhouse gas emissions and ammonia emissions during storage. And in that sense, then we're aiming to reduce the reliance on chemical fertilizers and reduce climate change or our impact on climate change. And at the same time, boosting resource recycling and renewable energy production. So some trials have been by SDAI. We found a reduction of 95% in methane production, and what we're noticing is that as you reduce biogas bubbling from the slurry, the carrier then essentially you're stopping the carrier bubbles lifting off ammonia during storage. The soluble organic matter, so the first couple of stages of breakdown still happen, hydrolysis still happens, and so what you're stopping is the final stage of anaerobic activity, and so you then have an increased methane production when you feed it into anaerobic digestion. In trials, independent trials, they found 19 to, in one trial, 40% increase in CH4 production in anaerobic digestion following treatment with the Glassport amendment. And at the same time, we've found increased ammonium in the slurry, which again, when used correctly and in good timing, leads to a grass yield increase in plant trials of about 15%. So just in terms of my own work here in green generation, I came on board as a sustainability expert, I guess. I was looking for end uses, alternative end uses for Digestate, because at the moment the fertilizer value of Digestate doesn't equate to people wanting to or being willing to pay for the Digestate. So to ship the Digestate off-site for land spreading is a significant cost to AD plants, unless there's a deal with maybe farmers where they bring in their slurry and in exchange they're getting Digestate. Then there are ways you can do it, but at the moment it's a significant cost to AD plants. So some alternative uses for the Digestate, they're all in research phase at the moment. They're very early stage, but there is a possibility for some alternative uses. Maybe as a growth medium for algae or black soldier fly. This requires or will require some end of waste criteria to be applied, which is a lengthy process in itself. There's also potential for extraction of high value intermediates. So rather than just getting biogas from the digestion process, you can extract volatile fatty acids such as butyric acid or cricoic acid and use them for bioplastics or pharmaceuticals. There's also potential for creating a higher value product, fertilizer product, maybe by precipitating out the nitrogen, or going for composting or for use as compost. The solids is used as compost, but not many places are doing that yet at the moment. The simplest way is just land spreading. I do think we need to start thinking about different approaches for Digestate, though, especially as anaerobic digestion increases in Ireland. So maybe we could discuss that a little bit on the panel. That's essentially it for me. I'd like to thank some of my supervisors there, Lawrence and Carl Richards and Owen Fenton in Teagasc, as well as the team at Glassport Bio, especially Camilla, who's given me a lot of help putting together some of these slides. So thanks very much.
Thanks very much, Stephen, for your presentation. Very interesting, and lots of work being completed on Digestate and some very interesting results and findings. So if I could just ask you to unshare your screen, we'll just go to the panel discussion, and I'm delighted as well to welcome Noel Gavigan, our technical executive in the Irish BioEnergy Association, who joins us for the panel discussion and the Q&A. So we have some questions. We have a large attendance this morning, a lot of participants. We have quite a few questions have come in. So we'd ask you to continue to post your questions through the Q&A tab at the bottom of the screen. So Stephen, just over to you, maybe just a couple of things there about the a question from Pádraig. What quality standards apply to Digestate in Ireland in the EU? So are the same standards that are being applied here applicable across the EU, or have you looked at what standards are applicable across the EU?
So Digestate from plants processing animal byproducts all requires pasteurization to the EU standard of 70 degrees for 1 hour. Our national alternative is the rule. As I said in the presentation, the national alternative really applies to dry anaerobic digestion, which isn't currently done in Ireland. So any wet AD plant, which is what most of the AD plants are, or all of the AD plants are at the moment, have to pasteurize. If they're taking in animal byproducts, they have to pasteurize for 70 degrees for 1 hour. That's what qualifies the Digestate then as safe as far as the EU are concerned. So that's the standard. I'm not sure if someone's talking about processing it, further processing for nitrogen removal and sale. But yeah, that's the standard. Yeah.
Okay, Noel, to bring you in there and just to give Stephen a short break for a second, a question from Michael, that co-ops and farm merchants have a vested interest in continuing the use of synthetic fertilizers, and as such there is a level of misinformation, deliberately or inferred. Suggest how this fake news could be counteracted. So maybe if you just comment on your interactions with the co-ops and as well, and maybe comment on that.
Yeah, well, what we found so far is the co-ops are very interested in adopting anaerobic digestion where they can. They would not only for their own members, because obviously there's the co-ops by their nature generally would have a lot of dairy farmers in their membership. There's other co-ops obviously in pig and other production, but they're quite keen to look at how they can move forward with their own sustainability criteria, both from their own processing facilities as well as their farmers that are inputting their material. So they are very interested in this. Yes, fertilizer is a product for them through their stores. It is something that is obviously a part of what they provide. But as things move forward, I mean, they'll obviously have to take that on board, that there may be a reduction in the chemical fertilizer and an increase in use of other materials. But you have the co-ops themselves also have dairy sludges and other materials coming out of their own processing. And by having the potential to use that in a biogas plant and recycle that onto land is an advantage. Just another one there on the regulations. Stephen spoke quite a lot about the animal byproducts regulations that are a very strong part of it. But the EU have also last year released their fertilizing products regulation, which is a very extensive document detailing all the different criteria for various different fertilizers, and that's going from organic to inorganic. Now the details in that are quite. It's a very lengthy document, and it covers all organic materials. And it's something that I think we're going to see a lot more of in the next couple of years. I think it actually comes into force in July 2022. So that is something that's going to be coming across our desk a lot in the next couple of years.
Okay, thanks very much, Noel. And over to you, Stephen. There's quite a few technical questions. So the first one there from Gary: do pathogen numbers increase during storage of Digestate, and if so, why? So if you could comment on that one.
So I think I can address them. They shouldn't, unless there's a source of contamination, a source of pathogens getting into the Digestate. So they're stored. What's been found in research is actually the opposite, that during storage, pathogens tend to die off. They haven't got an increased source of food. There's no source of contamination. So no is the answer, okay, generally, unless something's gone wrong, basically. So.
Okay, and if a subsequent question or a follow-on question from Gary, what method was used to spread slurry Digestate for field trial work to measure GHG emissions and ammonia?
We replicated trailing shoe application, just low emission spreading.
Okay. A couple of other ones here, Stephen, for you. Is the Digestate used in the runoff trials solely dairy slurry, or do you use any other types of slurry?
Digestate we used was from processing fat, oils, and grease with dairy slurry. So yeah, that's what we used. There have been other trials that have used other kinds of Digestate.
And has there been a difference in using dairy slurries and other slurries in the?
The main difference with dairy slurry is that you might get a bit more ligneous material. So like bits of undigested grass or something might survive. But that's the main difference. It all has to be macerated to less than 12 mils anyway, so there isn't a massive difference between them.
Okay. Question here from Garrett. Do you see a role for dried Digestate as a solid fertilizer that could be sold to garden centres or commercial horticulture outlets? So
potentially, but there are like extra requirements for it then if it's being used. Essentially you'd have to go for an end of waste thing, which is end of waste is going to become massive for a lot of what we're doing, I think. But so I don't, it's like, what to put it, you'd have to be doing other things with the rest of the fertilizer as well, because farmers typically don't want just the liquid that just has maybe high nitrogen and less phosphorus or potassium. If you're separating out the solids too much, then there's farmers may not want it as much with the remaining constituents as much. So
okay, thanks, Stephen. There's two questions here, one from Shane and one from John, about plastic and contamination of plastic. Are there any standards for plastic contamination and Digestate in Ireland, and how can we ensure that plastics are not re-entering agriculture? And then could you outline maybe the process of pre-treatment process to reduce or remove this plastic?
Yeah, so again, so what we're doing in Green Generation, we've put in a separator to separate out any potential plastic contamination before the pasteurization process. And we're working with Trinity University and NUIG on a potential project for actually digesting the plastics themselves so that you actually capture the energy potential from them. So there, in terms of standards, there isn't currently a standard for plastic contamination in Digestate in Ireland. So it is something that you have to be aware of. If it's primarily a problem when you're using packaged food waste, that you have to make sure you extract it from the Digestate. And so you can use a tritters or depackers, paddle depackers, and a series of filters. But ultimately, everything has to pass through a macerator as well. That doesn't allow particles of more than 12 mil to get through it. So there are a series of filters in place essentially to stop any plastic.
Okay, thanks, Stephen. Just a query here, just from a participant, that they've had an issue with worm kill after AD spreading. Nothing major, but how this could be avoided in the future. Would you have any comment on that, or?
I'd have to know more about the context if it was dry. So if the land is very dry and you spread on it, it's not great for the ammonia emissions either. It's possible that was the case there, but I'd have to have more details on the specifics of it. It's not something we come across regularly with people that are land spreading. So, well, one thing we have found, one local farmer that's using a lot of our Digestate is that the first year the grass kind of burnt a little bit, and there was some negatives like that, he thought, and then within a couple of years it seemed that the community, maybe the microbial community or the local community in the soil actually got accustomed to it and then thrived from using it. So
Okay, and just a follow-on question, probably another farmer-related question. How will from Owen, how will the structure or trafficability of soils behave under continued use of Digestate? So have you any experience
So yeah,
or done any work on that?
compared with just using chemical fertilizer, Digestate is really good for soil because it helps to replenish organic matter levels, and it helps to renew the soil essentially, because a lot of our soils are depleted of a lot of micronutrients and organic matter. So by using organic fertilizers in general and including Digestate, you'll replenish the soil structure and health. So it actually improves it.
And this is probably another related question, Stephen, a question on biodiversity from Will. Any information on the benefit of soil biodiversity from Digestate, and do I need to incorporate after spreading? So maybe what would the difference from a biodiversity perspective be with Digestate versus raw slurry, for instance?
So in terms of the community, I don't know that it's been studied to that level, looking at the different bacterial communities or that. In terms of incorporating after spreading, you can do that, and that traps in the ammonia, or you can target the growing crop, which is another approach to ensure that it's used there and then. So either approach, I think, would help improve the soil at least. The soil biodiversity will be boosted by providing micronutrients for bacterial communities and fungal communities and all the other communities that are there to thrive on. So it should boost biodiversity compared with chemical fertilizer, at least. Yeah.
Okay. Another technical one I'll bring Nolan then from Sean. Thanks for joining, Sean. What are copper levels? What are the copper levels in Digestate, and could continued use lead to toxicity?
So I have an answer for that. The copper levels were less than slurry in the trials that I did, but they could vary, and so it's just about being aware of what you're spreading on the land. They could vary depending on the feedstock that's being used for anaerobic digestion. But in the trials that I did and in other trials carried out by Waterford IT, copper levels were never at a dangerous or toxic level, or anything that would be considered negative in terms of spreading. So as you saw from my results there, the iron, if I just go back to this here, I have copper. I have results for copper. I can actually follow up with Sean Eustace afterwards if he's
okay. The other, just one last question, actually. There's a number of questions left, but one last one before I just bring Nolan in again. The R&D work, this is from Porrick, the R&D work was based on mesophilic AD. Do you think thermophilic AD might have further benefits in pathogen reduction and nutrient availability?
For sure in pathogen reduction, that's proven. In terms of nutrient availability, I don't know the answer on that. I don't think so. I know for sure that nobody's doing thermophilic AD in Ireland. It's thermophilic AD is let's say finicky. It's hard to the reason it's less stable is because the community that can survive at thermophilic temperatures, the good anaerobic digestion community that can survive at those temperatures is smaller. There's only a few bacteria and archaea that can survive at that temperature. So any perturbation or disturbance could destabilize the system. So most AD plants in Ireland, I think going forward, will be mesophilic, or even if it's up to 42 or 44 degrees, I don't see anyone really going beyond that. But the duration of time tends to be a long retention time in Ireland, between 50 and 100 days. And most trials show having that retention time is effective for killing off pathogens as well. Plus, there's the pasteurization step required, which kind of does it in.
Okay, Noel, I'll just bring you in, not on any specific question, but if you could perhaps comment on the broad, like we've had an excellent presentation from Stephen this morning. There's obviously a lot of interest, a lot of technical questions here on the whole area of Digestate, but could you give us a summary of the broader benefits of anaerobic digestion from an Irish perspective, if we were to see a mainstream industry being introduced here that's currently being replicated right across Europe? So would you just give us an outline of the broader benefits of anaerobic digestion from your perspective?
Well, I suppose the key benefits of it are, and just looking at it purely from an agricultural context, and not necessarily the material itself and nutrients itself, not looking at the energy side. It is a very effective way of recycling nutrients, be it from farm produce or farm byproduct, or be it from food waste. I mean, when we're looking at the amount of our waste collection at the moment, and we want a lot of brown bin rollout. It has been well rolled out across the country, but there is some more to happen on that. It is the best way of recycling that material, recovering the energy, but then recovering the nutrients as well, because we know as it stands, we have quite a high level of food waste. I don't know what the stat is. It is a third of all food that's produced is wasted. I don't know if it's higher or lower than that, but it's quite a high figure. So to recycle those nutrients back out of the wasted food, biogas, going through the biogas plant is probably the best way of doing so. So it does have huge benefits in that context. The fact that we export a lot of our, we produce far more food than we actually consume here, particularly in the products we produce on wholesale. We won't actually be able to meet a third of our requirement for fertilizer, but we'll definitely be able to produce a fair amount of it. So it does lead to a lot more efficiency in nutrients coming back, and we do see with slurries, compared to raw agricultural materials going out, it does increase the uptake. It does have a better effect, and that is the anecdotal evidence of farms using it in other countries, but also scientifically backed up as well. So,
okay,
that's well documented.
Thanks, Noel. Just a quick follow-on question from that, and again, it's something just for your input. In terms of the biogas that's produced, where do you see the best value being achieved from that biogas, and in what sector?
Well, the biogas itself, really what you're looking at is what's the highest value we can gain from it. And when you look at all our energy uses at the moment, we have electricity, we have heat, and we have transport. They're the three key things, and the highest costing energy in society really is transport fuel. So using biogas as a transport fuel really has, if you're looking per cubic meter of gas produced, that is where it's going to have the greatest impact in terms of financial viability. Now there are obviously there are ways of using it for heat and using it for electricity, and we've those figures done as well, and it does fit in many scenarios there. But the highest value is actually in transport. So if we have a system where we can utilize it, in particular for heavy goods vehicles or heavy transport, where electrification is not really an option, this is a place where biogas fits in better than any other renewable source.
Okay, thanks very much, Noel. Just a couple of final questions. We're coming towards the end, Stephen, there. Some of them you've probably touched on already, but we'll... one query here about, is it appropriate to compare emissions and runoff, etc., between slurry and digestate of different sources? So can you just summarize in terms of what sources you've used again in terms of your research?
Yeah, so what I did was I used dairy cattle slurry from one farm, and I anaerobically digested it, and I left it untreated. I used untreated, but it was all from the same source, because you can't really compare unless it's from the same source. The only difference with the digested is that you're adding in a co-digestion feedstock, which in my case was fats, oils, and grease. And so that's the nature of anaerobic digestion, it'll be a combined mixed feedstock. So yeah, essentially, if you're doing comparative work, you should use stuff from the same source, which is
okay.
what we did.
Just a question here, Stephen, for you again, from Will. What should we be looking at? What should we be looking at for indigestion analysis to avoid potential issues in long-term spreading? And are there any restrictions on the number of digestate applications that can be made?
The restriction on digestate application is similar to other organic fertilizers. It's you have to watch that you don't exceed 170 kilos of nitrogen per hectare, and you have to watch your P limits as well. In terms of metals and other analysis, so it's not like sewage sludge that might have a lot of metal contaminants. So it's not in the same sphere as sewage sludge where there's a risk there. So in terms of my work, at least, I didn't find any issues where there was something, a metal or a potential contaminant that was high in the digestate. Other work has found similar findings for the same. So
just I might come into that, Sean, for a second as
yes,
well.
Noel, yes.
In terms of, like, there is a lot of some discussion in this forum here of different metals. Copper came in there earlier on. You know, we also have to acknowledge that copper is actually vital for any biological process. For any sheep farmer will tell you copper is something that they often have to supplement. You know, and even for human health, everything. It's there are many metals that we need in trace element forms. They are trace elements. They are part of nature, and every metal has a most of them would have uses biologically. Iron is the same. Obviously, if you go above a certain level, they can reach a toxic level, and it's the same in any system. So it's really keeping a watch on that. In terms of the limits, Stephen's right, the nutrient management planning will really set an overall limit on how much digestate can go out on land. And just there was a question earlier on in terms of plastics, that the new fertilizer product regulation that the EU are bringing in, that has particular limits in there for contamination by plastics and glass and metals. So that it's been well thought out, and that there's plenty of focus being put on that.
No problem. Thanks very much, Noel. Just one query here, Stephen, and you mentioned it at the start of your presentation that you're currently undergoing a recalibration process with your pasteurizer and green generation, and just issues you've had with that. Do you want to just elaborate on that again and just?
Yeah. So just to satisfy the EU requirements for for digestate quality standards, it has to be pasteurized at 70 degrees for 1 hour. We're revalidating our pasteurizer to ensure that we're capable of doing that, and that process is progressing well with the Department of Agriculture. Okay,
thanks, Stephen. Just two final points, and we're coming to the end. So if there's anyone any final question, you need to get them to us straight away. I think we've addressed most of the queries. There's one here from Shane, and Shane is asking, is there any value to this material, and have farmers been purchasing it from your AD plant? So I do think you elaborated in your presentation, and this question came in probably before you presented your slides about the fertilizer value, but what is the value of this material, and have you been selling it from the AD plant, or could you elaborate on that, Stephen?
Yeah, well, initially I came in just to try and reduce the bill for sending it to farmers. So we've prioritized people who are able to come and draw it themselves. There's a significant benefit. One local farmer has reduced his fertilizer bill by 40 to 50,000 euro per year by using Digestate. So there's a huge value in it, but trying to teach people, farmers, that there is a value, and just building trust in that. And it takes a few years of maybe doing a trial patch in the field and this kind of thing. So there's until farmers see it on the ground that there's a value in it, it's you have to try and show them that. I think that's where we're at the moment. So
okay, we have two final questions in, and we won't be able to unfortunately answer any more questions at this stage. So there's before we go to the two final questions, there's one other question here from Shane. And I think you've addressed it, but just maybe to elaborate briefly again, Stephen, what are the regulatory controls in place for a farmer to use Digestate? Is a waste exemption required? And how is the nutrient analysis stroke pathogen failure communicated to the farmer?
So there's a few questions in that.
So the regulatory controls is the first for the farmer.
So farmers are required to register as OFSI end users to use Digestate if they have animals on their farm. So that's the first step. There's a commercial document has to accompany all dispatch of Digestate to farms. So there's a record of it. So regular E. coli and Salmonella testing is required at anaerobic digestion plants. In the case that any failed result comes back, so any positive result for Salmonella or E. coli, the department have to be notified immediately. And then the department would take it from there with going back through who got Digestate recently. When you dispatch Digestate to farmers, you have to remind them that there's a 21-day exclusion period for animals from any ground that has been recently transferred.
And is the is there a nutrient analysis on the delivery docket or the docket that's given?
Not on the delivery docket. We carry out regular nutrient analysis of the Digestate quarterly nutrient analysis. It's typically around 6 to 6.5 kg nitrogen per cubic meter. And then we go through it with the farmer. We go through their land, their holding, the amount of animals they have, their organic nitrogen produced on farm. There may be other sources of organic nitrogen being used and phosphorus. And we send them what they're able to take, and we don't exceed that. So.
Okay. So two final questions. One, from Deirdre here, has the risk of disease transfer from animal byproducts being considered, for example, African swine fever, and how do we address this increasing risk while supporting this valuable process? So just a quick comment.
Look, I might come in that because the animal byproducts regulations, which have been ongoing for well over a decade at this stage, I have to comment or to compliment how the vet section in the Department of Agriculture take that on board. It was quite frustrating at the start, I have to say, for the bioenergy industry to when we were dealing with them, because they were very, very strict on what was required, and it did take quite a lot of work to come up with the framework for what is now the controls that all biogas plants operate under. So it's a licensing procedure under ABP, and they, I have to say that the vets within the department, the animal herd is treated as a sacrosanct, and it's always an abundance of caution. And in fairness, they've proven themselves well over the years in that abundance of caution. So I have to say, that they will always go well beyond. They will make sure. I have to say that they're very, very thorough in what they do. So in terms of any disease control, I do. We've been dealing with them for, I said, over a decade at this stage, and they just sacrosanct the animal health side of it.
Okay, and one final question for you, Noel, here from Owen, about the could you please comment on process of development of an Irish Digestate quality standard? The EPA appear to be imposing overcautious testing at frequencies far higher than PAS 110. So would you just comment on that, please?
We had started, we'd actually developed a draft standard here. IrBea had developed it about 7 or 8 years ago. And it was, I have to say, we've got a lot of assistance from many people across the industry. We held back on it becoming a standard because there was the EU regulation was due to come in. That took many years, last year. So we haven't progressed it at this point. We know CRAE have a compost standard, and we often work with CRAE on many matters. I do understand they're looking at taking on a Digestate standard as well. So I think that's where that is starting to move now. With PAS 110 is quite different to the European regulation, but I think any standard was going to have to be based on the EU regulation going forward, rather than we built ourselves from scratch. So So I think the really and truly it's going to be through the European regulation that we'll be doing any assessment like that, and we'll have to bring the EPA along as well. You know, quite often they have to come along the learning curve on these things and understand the EU's thoughts when they're putting these regulations together.
Okay, I think that concludes our questions. I just want to just thank Stephen. I want to thank Noel for participating this morning. I also want to thank all of our attendees this morning. And thank you all for joining. We do hope that you can continue to join us next week in a fortnight's time, and also at future webinars. So I'd like to finally just thank Teresa O'Brien, who works with us in the Irish BioEnergy Association, for all of her work in the preparing and getting this all up and running and ensure that it runs smoothly. So thanks very much, Teresa. And on that note, we will conclude this morning's webinar. And again, thank you, and look forward to seeing you all again soon.